global market for mass timber reached a milestone last year, exceeding $1 billion for the first time. The market is expected to more than double to $2.5 billion by 2027, according to estimates from Research and Markets. But as mass timber continues to nudge its way from the fringe to the mainstream, is the industry ready for greater demand? Joining us today to discuss mass timber's future are Sam Dicke, a Los Angeles-based business development manager for the builder Timberlab, a Swinnerton company that launched in Portland, Oregon last year, and Erica Spiritos, Timberlab's vice president and director of Preconstruction. Sam and Erica, welcome.
Good morning.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start off by talking about demand. In what sectors is TimberMart seeing growth for mass timber's use, and where do you see future opportunities for penetration?
Yeah, I think one of the major areas that we're seeing demand and growth in the mass timber sector, and maybe we take a step back and we think about where we've been in the mass timber world for the last couple of years. I think traditionally, when we first got started, we saw a lot of mass timber projects in the United States focused on commercial office. That was really a primary market, some public and civic work for universities. That's been a really strong and core market for mass timber, but we've now done about 3.6 million square feet since 2017. And in 2022 and 2023, the vast majority of our work going forward is actually in the multifamily space. Mm-hmm. So earlier this last year, we helped on the project, the Ascent Tower, which many folks might have seen. I think it was recently featured on NBC, actually, which is really exciting. But that was a 25-story timber tower over six stories of concrete with 19 stories of heavy timber above. We're just actually starting to install timber this week in Seattle on our Heartwood project, which is an 8-story affordable housing project in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. We're working on a 12-story multifamily project in the Rhino neighborhood in Denver that actually was just the award recipient of the Softwood Lumber Board's grant program. And we're seeing, residential work like that all across the country. So I think really with the adoption of the 2024, 2021 IBC International Building Codes that allows for the type 4 A, B, and C, up to a 12 and 18-story buildings. I think that's really going to push forward mass timber's adoption in the multifamily space. But we're definitely seeing adoption in other areas too. Erica, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other types of cool projects we've worked on and are seeing?
Sure. Well, I get really excited about the projects that have a social impact, and in addition to the environmental impact that I think we all appreciate about mass timber. And one of the recent markets that we've been exploring is healthcare, medical office buildings and healthcare facilities that are traditionally built with concrete and steel. Owners are now looking to mass timber to provide the physiological kind of wellness benefits that we all associate with wood. And we're overcoming hurdles associated with those product types related to vibration performance, higher live load criteria, and finding that mass timber can meet those requirements for those buildings. And that's really exciting. So working on a couple of projects, one with Peace Health right now, a new ambulatory care center that will hopefully set a precedent for other companies in the healthcare industry to explore mass timber for their future projects.
I'm wondering, as you're discussing these projects that you're working on, whether or not the industry has the manufacturing infrastructure in place to handle this type of growth. I mean, what is Timberlab doing what is Timberlab doing itself to ensure it has sufficient product to build with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that strikes kind of at the core of our business model. When we got involved in the mass timber space 3 or 4 years ago, it was really through Swinnerton Builders building the largest mass timber project in North America, First Tech Federal Credit Union. And what we identified there were specific pinch points in the market, primarily in glulam manufacturing and fabrication. A lot of glulam manufacturers have been around in the United States for 50, 60 years, but they didn't have the fabrication capabilities to deliver the product to site that really increases the efficiency of building with mass timber. And so when we opened our fabrication shop in Portland, we had one machine last January, in January of 2021. And that allowed us to work with commodity glulam manufacturers all across the Pacific Northwest, take their glulam into our shop, handle the detailing, shop drawings, and fabrication process, and deliver that to site as a fully prefabricated kit of parts with the hardware already installed on each of the beams and columns as it's coming out. We've now expanded to 2 machines in our Portland facility, and are really excited to announce that we're going to be expanding into 2 shifts as well. Yeah. I mean, you go in there at any time of day, it seems like people are working there now. And then we're also opening up an additional fabrication facility in the Southeast we just announced. So as we continue to see, and this, harkens back to your question that you just asked, John, not really only centralized in the Pacific Northwest, but now we're seeing mass timber opportunities in Charlotte and Austin and all across the United States. Having a presence in the Southeast will help us kind of continue to alleviate pinch points, both in that space, but also geographically as well.
Can I just ask you a very quick question about the Southeast facility? Where is it going to be located? And are you going to be using softwood as opposed to engineered lumber in that facility?
Yeah, so the new facility in the Southeast will be located just outside of Greenville, South Carolina. And we'll have, as Sam said, the fabrication capacity to process both glulam and cross-laminated timber. Okay. The primary lumber that's utilized in that part of the country is southern yellow pine. It is a softwood, but we're using softwood lumber to create engineered wood products, and that's the same all over the country. So gluing together, in this case, southern yellow pine into large format elements, whereas on the West Coast, we're mostly utilizing Douglas fir or an umbrella category of lumber called SPF, which encompasses spruce, pine, and fir. All softwoods.
Okay. The advent of mass timber making its way into the market coincides with, a trend by metropolitan areas everywhere that they're monitoring and setting stricter limits on carbon emissions on new and existing buildings. Mass timber has been positioned as a solution to mandates for sequestration and mitigating embodied carbon. But is that message getting through to developers and municipalities, or is more education needed?
I mean, I think more education is always a good thing. That's kind of my motto, right? I mean, anytime we can continue to break down barriers and have conversations and share what we've learned across the industry, that's going to benefit everybody involved. So I'm always going to say that it's a pro to have more education. But I think there are cities out there actually doing a lot to promote mass timber for just those reasons that you mentioned, John, sustainability, embodied carbon, promoting healthier workspaces. We've actually seen some cities take the initiative, like in Boston, for instance, they have a mass timber accelerator program, which is really exciting, where, you might have heard of that one, where they actually are picking programs, picking projects that they want to actually see through to completion, where the city is actually investing funds in that. In California, they had a design award for that as well. The Softwood Lumber Board, for instance, just hosted a grant program that also helped, promote mass timber projects. In New Haven, Connecticut, for instance, they offered increased FAR for certain mass timber projects. So, there's definitely municipalities working to sort of promote that element and through different types of programs and processes, which I think is really cool. There's certainly room for further education and an improvement on that. I think going forward, we might see more types of programs implemented in other cities around the country, but that's sort of some of the things that we're seeing at the onset of these types of programs. Mm-hmm.
And I might add that we're seeing that on a different scale as well. Yes, the cities are taking these steps toward more environmentally responsible design and construction, but we're seeing it as well on college campuses and large corporate campuses as well, where the facilities groups or the construction groups are deciding that mass timber is how they're going to build out the rest of their campus because of the embodied carbon reduction and the opportunity to meet carbon reduction goals.
Mm-hmm. Just as a side note, is price or cost rather a mitigating factor in using mass timber, or is it roughly equivalent to using regular wood or steel or what other building materials?
Great question. We find that mass timber is best used as an alternative material to concrete and steel. So most of the time we're competing against concrete and steel as opposed to light wood frame construction. The cost differential between mass timber and concrete and steel, a more conventional building material or system, really varies across the country. And one of the contributing factors is labor price, because mass timber requires such little labor in the construction. Mass timber really thrives in environments that have high cost of labor: San Francisco, LA, New York, Seattle. In parts of the country where the cost of labor is low, mass timber has a harder time competing. But we're finding that the schedule savings and the higher value of the building can offset some of the cost premiums associated with the material. So I would say the premium varies, and in many cases, we're able to arrive at cost neutrality or even, a more cost advantageous system because of those schedule benefits and the higher quality associated with mass timber building.
And John, just to piggyback off
Sure.
of what Erica was saying, I mean, I think it's important that, we reiterate some of the ways that we can make that solution happen to reach cost parity or more advantageous solution is getting involved early in the process and designing the buildings for mass timber. A lot of times folks, it's funny, I was just up in Spokane the last few days at an event we hosted up there to talk about mass timber. And, a lot of times architects will say, yeah, we tried it in 2017. We took this steel building and we tried to sub in mass timber panels. And it's like, yeah, it's not an optimized system for mass timber. You're trying to fit square pegs into round holes. Whereas, if you start in the beginning stages designing a mass timber project, it's much more likely that you'll be able to, piggyback off of all of the benefits that we've just mentioned in utilizing that prefabricated approach.
In preparation for this conversation, Sam and I had a discussion about kind of mass timber as a choice as opposed to a mandate. And we talked about a couple of projects that you've worked on, like the Portland Airport, the Public Sanitation District Center, and a big project in Arkansas as well. Can you talk a little bit about, why the clients decided to go with mass timber as opposed to another material in any or all those projects?
Yeah,
Erica, do you want to talk a little bit about PDX?
Sure. So the Portland Airport is being renovated right now to accommodate increased demand, more travelers arriving and leaving from the airport, and also to improve the seismic resiliency of the main terminal. And the project team was excited to use timber for the new structure, the new roof structure, as a way of celebrating regional materials. And so that was the primary motivation for the Port of Portland, the owner of that project.
Was it an aesthetic choice primarily?
I think it was I almost want to say like a value proposition, and it was about celebrating the people and the place and the environment of the region, promoting equity across the manufacturing community here, supporting the local manufacturing community, supporting the timber community, and providing economic
opportunity. Yeah, sure.
Opportunity for the industry here. And so in many ways it's just a celebration of people in place. And
yes,
it happens to have the side effect of beautiful aesthetics.
It seems to me that, where mass timber is going to make a breakthrough is where it can be sourced locally. As more factories keep popping up, the more likely it will be a material of choice, I would think.
Absolutely. I mean, you can envision a future that's like farm to table for a mass timber building, and where you walk into a building in Arkansas and you recognize the wood as southern pine, and you walk into a building in Arkansas and you recognize the wood, or in Oregon and you recognize the wood as Douglas fir, and then you walk into a building in New York and you recognize the black spruce. And that celebration of the regional material, I think, is so important in terms of creating a sense of respect for the natural materials that our lives depend on. Each tree species has its own visual qualities, strength qualities, and to create a connection between people and the built environment that honors those natural materials, I think is incredibly powerful. And if those conversations can start with timber, then perhaps they ripple out, and we start to begin to have conversations about other materials and where they come from as well. So I think, yes, the future is, regionally sourced mass timber for your building. We're not quite there yet in terms of, the development of the supply chain, but I think that's an exciting future to plan for and to anticipate for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Just to also add to that too, I think 100 years ago, in the early 1900s, every sort of large warehouse building, office build, I guess before office buildings, factory spaces, they were all built utilizing local timber. I mean, that was a given, right? And as concrete and steel became the industry standard, and we started to then change where our steel production came from, and cost drivers had us produce steel internationally and bring it through channels at large ports. We started to see a shift away from that, but there's really been this renewed movement to support local materials. But it harkens back to how we used to build buildings 100 years ago, which is kind of a cool full circle if you think about it, of supporting local economies.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to talk about this public sanitation district project? I'm curious. I'm curious myself about how mass timber is being used in that.
Yeah, that's actually a beautiful project, the Orange County Sanitation District. I don't know, Erica, if you wanted to talk a little bit about the scope for that job, and then sort of why timber was used, and how we won that project actually won an early grant that helped it got to fruition.
I actually don't know as much about that project. Do you know enough to share?
John, I think it would be cooler to actually talk maybe about the Heartwood project, the 8-story affordable housing in Seattle.
That'd be fine, sure, because and that kind of parlays into you're seeing multifamily as being a hotter market right now for this. Yeah,
so Heartwood is this really beautiful project that's going up in Seattle right now, and it's an 8-story. And what's really cool about it is that it actually was originally designed as a 5/2, something you might traditionally see with a 2-story podium and then five stories of stick frame. But with the new adoption of the Type 4C, allowing for 85 feet of construction using mass timber and full exposure, the design team was able to really focus, and the Swinnerton team in Seattle was really able to focus on supporting that new product type, and to get an extra floor in, which helped the developer meet their pro forma. And so you have this, beautiful 8-story project that now they're about 400 to 450 square foot units. So they're kind of micro units, but they're targeted specifically as affordable or reasonably priced for the Capitol Hill neighborhood, designed for, teachers and folks that work and live in the community to be able to actually live in that space. But we're really able to take a lot of efficiencies from the fabrication process, where we've designed a connection, in conjunction with DCI engineers and Susan Jones, Atelier Jones, a connection that's a 2-hour fire-rated connection that uses no steel. So it's a wood-to-wood bearing connection, which is really exciting because it's one of the first in the industry. And as we were kind of talking about, harkening back to older traditional styles of building, that really, if you've ever worked with wood, it invokes kind of this older joinery type connection.
Right.
So yeah, the Heartwood project is a super awesome project. I think timber was utilized in that way to allow the developer to actually gain another floor, which made their pro forma work. But it also, as Erica was just speaking, really sets an element of place for the folks who live in Seattle, as obviously there's a rich history of timber in the Pacific Northwest. Being able to live in that environment really supports the economic development of the region.
Mm-hmm. My last question is talking about estimates about growth for the mass timber. Market watchers say it could be as high as 15% per, on a compound annual rate. What's your company's prognosis about this over the next 5 years?
I would say we're growing exponentially, both in volume of work and in the size of our team. Since beginning our work on mass timber projects back in 2017, our revenue has nearly doubled every year. And that's something that I don't expect will remain constant. I think we'll find a really happy kind of leveling ground, but we've grown our team from a handful of people to 50 over the last 4 years, not including our fabrication craft and our field teams who travel around and installing our buildings. So with those team members included, about 100 of us folks at Timberlab. And I think that is representative of what we're seeing across the industry. And I think we're seeing mass timber more and more in cities that are smaller across the entire country. So it's not just Seattle and Portland and, it's Charlotte, it's St. Louis, it's Cleveland, it's, Austin, Texas, and the whole, across the whole, it's Boston, it's across the whole country. We're seeing mass timber on the rise steadily. And I think, we're going to have to try and figure out ways to keep up with it, converting folks in the construction industry to start really focusing on mass timber. It's going to take a village. We need more. We need more awesome people at Timberlab, and we need more companies like Timberlab to start up and really commit to mass timber if we're going to change the future and the way we build our cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think if we think about where, when I got involved in the mass timber industry, it was 2016, and D.R. Johnson had just opened their facility in Southern Oregon. They were the first company in the United States to get their PRG 320 certification. SmartLam was already producing panels, but they got their certification slightly after. In that time, the amount of mass timber manufacturers has grown exponentially, and it continues to grow, and it will continue to grow as the market increases. Steve Marshall, who used to be with the U.S. Forest Service and had retired a few years ago, there was a study that was commissioned, and they affectionately named this trend the Marshall effect after him, which is essentially predicting that the number of mass timber buildings will double every year. From kind of starting in 2020 from here on out. And as you start to see that, we're seeing that trend easily. As it became, I almost used to be able to name every mass timber project in the Portland area. And now people are telling me about this one that's going in Cully and this other one that's going in on, it's like, oh my gosh, I've had friends text me about projects and I go, I had no idea that had CLT in it. It's starting to go from sort of the fringe and the niche to the mainstream now. As down here in California and Los Angeles, we're seeing it, proposed on 400, 500, 600,000 square feet, massive development type projects. In Texas, huge other projects are for whole development, large scale tech companies, meet their carbon and sustainability goal, but also to provide a better workspace for their workforce and for their employees. And so it makes sense that mass timber would grow at 15%. And that it seems a little conservative from our perspective. As we start to see, as Erica just mentioned, massive projects take off all across the country, and smaller projects in Iowa and Cleveland and Milwaukee and all throughout the United States. It's really exciting to see just the vast diversity that we're starting to see in these types of projects.
Thank you both for taking a couple of minutes to talk about this project, your projects, and the market in general.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, John. We really appreciate it.
And thanks to our audience for joining us. This is John Caulfield from Building, Design, and Construction.